Before dawn had fully broken over Buckingham Palace, a sealed emergency order was already moving through royal corridors. Staff whispered. Senior aides avoided eye contact. And when Catherine was quietly summoned for a private audience with King Charles, one question spread through the palace like wildfire. What had happened that forced the king to act so suddenly against Camilla? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The order was like it ordinary palace paperwork. It was handled with the kind of caution usually reserved for moments when the monarchy itself feels the ground shifting beneath it. Reports suggest that long before most of Britain had even woken up, trusted officials were already being called into quiet rooms, phones were being kept short, and familiar faces inside the royal household were suddenly careful with every word. Something had changed. Not slowly, not politely. Suddenly, King Charles, already carrying the weight of illness, duty, and a divided household, had reportedly reached a point where silence was no longer protection. For months, whispers around Camilla's influence had moved through the palace like smoke under a locked door. Some dismissed them as jealousy, others called them exaggerations. But those closest to the inner circle allegedly sensed something deeper, a growing fear that too much power was being pulled in one direction while the future of the crown needed steadier hands. Then Catherine was summoned. That detail alone sent shockwaves through the household. Catherine was not known for chasing authority. She had built her strength quietly, through patience, discipline, and a public image rooted in service rather than control. So when her name became tied to a sealed emergency document, insiders understood the meaning immediately. This was not a favor, this was not ceremony, this was a transfer of trust. The reported document awaiting Charles's signature was said to involve selected responsibilities, once linked to Camilla's influence inside the royal machine. No grand announcement came. No dramatic public statement followed. Staff were allegedly told to remain silent, which only made the tension more explosive. Because inside a palace, silence is rarely empty. It usually means the truth is too dangerous to release too soon. By the time the first rumors reached outside circles, the story had already grown bigger than one royal disagreement. It had become a question of power, legacy, and survival. Was Charles protecting Catherine? Was he limiting Camilla? Or was he finally drawing a line between personal loyalty and royal duty? Whatever the answer, one thing felt undeniable. The crown was moving, the old balance was cracking. And Catherine, once seen as the graceful future queen waiting her turn, was now being pulled directly into the center of a decision that could reshape the palace forever. But the emergency order did not appear out of nowhere. It was the culmination of months of tensions that had been building behind palace walls. For months the public saw smiles, handshakes, and carefully choreographed appearances. Yet behind closed doors, a very different story was unfolding, one marked by disagreements, competing visions, and growing concern about who would guide the monarchy through an uncertain future. The tension did not arrive all at once. It gathered quietly, in private conversations, in careful pauses, in the way senior courtiers reportedly began weighing every decision against one painful question. Could the monarchy afford more uncertainty while King Charles was already carrying the burden of illness and duty? His health challenges had placed a new kind of pressure on the royal household. Every appearance mattered, every absence was noticed. Every internal disagreement felt heavier than before, because the crown was no longer operating in calm waters. It was moving through a storm with the world watching, and in that storm, Catherine's role had begun to change. She was no longer simply the poised future queen standing beside William. She was becoming a symbol of steadiness, at a time when the palace desperately needed it. Reports suggest senior advisors had started viewing her not just as popular, but as essential. Her quiet discipline, her careful words, and her ability to connect with the public gave her an influence that could not be forced, bought, or demanded. It had been earned slowly, and that made it powerful. That growing support reportedly created unease in certain corners of the royal household. Camilla had spent years building her place beside Charles, surviving criticism, public doubt, and the long shadow of the past. But influence inside the palace is not only about title, it is about access, trust, and timing. As Catherine's public standing rose, questions began to circulate about whether the future direction of the monarchy should remain tied to old loyalties or shift toward the next generation. Different interpretations of the palace mood suggest that disagreements over priorities became harder to hide. Some advisors allegedly pushed for a cleaner, more modern royal image, one centered on William and Catherine's future leadership. Others were said to worry that moving too quickly would expose deeper divisions. And in the middle stood Charles, a king caught between personal devotion and institutional survival. This was where the divide sharpened, because Camilla's influence, once treated as part of Charles's private world, was now reportedly becoming a matter of public consequence. Staff whispered about factions. Courtiers watched alliances form quietly. Some saw Catherine as the safest bridge to the future. Others feared that shifting too much authority toward her would be read as a direct rejection of Camilla. But the monarchy has always survived by sensing danger before it becomes disaster. And Charles, weakened but not blind, reportedly understood that hesitation could become its own form of failure. The smiles continued, the handshakes continued. Yet beneath the polished surface, the palace was preparing for a choice that could no longer be avoided. As tensions quietly escalated, one particular incident reportedly convinced Charles that immediate action could no longer be delayed. Every royal crisis has a turning point, a single moment when private frustrations become impossible to ignore. According to palace whispers, that moment arrived during a high-level discussion that left even veteran courtiers stunned by what unfolded behind closed doors. It was not described as a shouting match, because palace power rarely announces itself that loudly. It was colder than that, sharper, more controlled. Reports suggest the meeting began as another attempt to settle questions about royal direction, public duty, and the shape of the monarchy during a period of deep uncertainty. But as the discussion moved from ceremony to influence, and from influence to authority, the mood reportedly hardened. What had once been handled through careful smiles and private compromise now became impossible to smooth over. At the center of the strain was a question no one wanted to say too bluntly. Who could be trusted to guide the crown when Charles himself was under growing pressure? His health challenges had already made every decision feel urgent. The palace could not afford confusion, it could not afford mixed signals, and it certainly could not afford a quiet struggle over power at the very heart of the royal household. Different accounts suggest that senior officials left the meeting deeply concerned. Not because one disagreement had happened, but because the disagreement revealed something larger. The old arrangement was no longer holding. Camilla's supporters believed her place beside the king gave her natural influence. Catherine's supporters believed the future of the monarchy demanded a clearer path toward William and Catherine. Between those two views, Charles reportedly found himself facing a painful truth. Loyalty to one person could not be allowed to endanger loyalty to the institution. Catherine, as always, remained publicly silent. That silence became part of the drama. She did not defend herself in the press. She did not fuel speculation. She simply continued with restraint, and in doing so made the contrast even more powerful. While whispers grew louder around the palace, Catherine's calm became a kind of answer. She did not need to demand authority. The pressure around her was already proving why many believed she should be trusted with it. Inside the household, staff reportedly sensed a decision approaching. It was there in the sudden caution of aides, the careful language of advisors, and the growing number of private consultations around Charles. The palace mood shifted from tense to expectant. Something was being prepared, something that could not be undone once signed, and for Charles, the choice became deeply personal. To intervene would risk humiliation for Camilla. To delay would risk instability for the crown. That was the terrible balance pressing down on him, the kind of choice kings are remembered for long after the polite language fades. Yet while courtiers focused on the disagreement itself, few realized that Charles had already begun considering a solution that would change everything. Then came the moment no one expected. As the sun rose over London, King Charles reportedly reviewed a document that would send shockwaves through the royal household. What happened next transformed whispers into reality. The overnight consultations had not been ordinary briefings. They were described by palace insiders as urgent, controlled, and unusually tense, the kind of meetings where every sentence carried risk. Senior advisors reportedly laid out the same warning in different ways. The monarchy needed clarity, and it needed it before private uncertainty turned into public weakness. Charles had listened for months. He had weighed loyalty against duty. But now the pressure had reached the point where waiting looked more dangerous than acting. The document before him was said to be direct, narrow, and powerful. It did not erase Camilla. It did not remove her place beside the king. But reports suggest it transferred selected responsibilities away from her circle and placed them under Catherine's growing authority. That was what made it so explosive. This was not simply about schedules or ceremonies. It was about trust. It was about who would guide the next chapter when the crown could no longer afford confusion. For Charles, the decision must have been deeply painful. Camilla had stood beside him through years of judgment and public suspicion. Yet Catherine represented something different, the future the public already believed in. And in royal life, belief is power. Senior advisors allegedly argued that Catherine's calm image, her bond with William, and her rising influence gave the monarchy a stronger shield at a fragile time. Charles, worn down by pressure and aware of history watching, reportedly gave the order final approval. Once that approval came, the palace moved quickly. Officials began adjusting lines of responsibility. Private instructions were passed through trusted channels. Aides who had spent weeks whispering about possible changes suddenly found themselves dealing with reality. Some were shocked, others were relieved. A few, according to palace whispers, understood immediately that this marked the beginning of a new internal order. Then Catherine was informed. That moment carried its own quiet force. Catherine had not publicly demanded this role. She had not fought for it through headlines. Her strength had always been restraint, and now that restraint had brought her to the center of power. Reports suggest she received the decision with seriousness rather than triumph, aware that every new responsibility would bring new scrutiny. This was not a crown placed gently in her hands. It was a burden handed over during a storm. Outside the palace, speculation began to intensify. The smallest movements were studied. Every silence became suspicious. But inside royal circles, the meaning was already clear. Charles had drawn a line. Camilla's influence had been checked. Catherine's authority had been expanded. And the future of the monarchy had shifted before the public even knew the full story. But signing the order was only the beginning, because the real consequences became clear once the details started spreading through royal circles. By midday, attention had shifted from the king to Catherine. Suddenly, the woman long admired for her patience and restraint found herself at the center of a historic transition that few could have imagined just months earlier. What made the moment so powerful was not only the authority being placed in Catherine's hands, but the way she had reached it. She had not built her position through noise, rivalry, or open confrontation. She had done it through years of discipline, careful service, and a quiet understanding of what the crown demands from those who carry its weight. Reports suggest that when Catherine accepted the expanded responsibilities, she did so with the seriousness of someone who knew this was not a personal victory. It was a test. Inside royal circles, that difference mattered. Some senior royals reportedly saw the king's decision as a necessary correction, a move toward steadiness, at a time when the monarchy could not afford private confusion. Catherine represented a bridge between tradition and the future. She was familiar enough to comfort the public, yet modern enough to speak to a new generation. That rare balance had become one of her greatest strengths, and now, according to palace whispers, it had become one of the reasons Charles trusted her with more. Public confidence in Catherine had also changed the calculation. For years, she had been watched, judged, and compared, but she had survived that pressure by refusing to become careless with her role. She reminded many of past future queens who understood that true influence inside the monarchy often grows slowly, almost invisibly, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. Catherine's rise was not sudden. The order only made visible what many had already sensed. She was becoming central to the crown's survival. William's support reportedly gave the shift even greater force. He stood beside her, not as a man surprised by her strength, but as someone who had long understood it. Together, they represented the next chapter, not in theory, but in practice. Their partnership had become part of the monarchy's emotional foundation, and Charles's decision appeared to recognize that reality. Among palace staff, the reaction was said to be cautious but hopeful. Catherine had earned respect because she listened, remembered, and carried herself without making others feel small. In a household where power can bruise as easily as it protects, that mattered deeply. Her approach suggested duty before ego, service before display, and loyalty to the institution above personal ambition. Still, triumph inside the palace is never simple. Every new responsibility creates new pressure. Every rise creates resentment. Catherine may have stepped into a stronger role, but she also stepped closer to the center of the storm. The symbolism was clear. A new royal chapter had opened, and its first pages were already filled with tension. Yet every major shift in royal power creates winners and losers, and attention soon turned to the person most affected by the king's decision. For years, Camilla occupied one of the most influential positions within the royal household. Now, reports suggested that some of those responsibilities were no longer hers to control. The implications were impossible to ignore. For Camilla's supporters, the king's decision landed like a private humiliation wrapped in palace silence. No official language could fully soften what the shift appeared to mean. A queen who had spent years carving out her place beside Charles was now facing questions about the limits of her influence, and those questions cut deeper because they touched the very thing the palace fears most: public perception. If Catherine was being trusted with expanded authority, then many would naturally ask what had gone wrong behind the scenes. Camilla remained publicly composed, and that composure mattered. She has long understood that survival inside the royal world often depends on refusing to show pain, anger, or defeat. But according to palace whispers, the calm surface did not end speculation, it fed it. Every appearance became a test. Every careful smile became something people tried to decode. The palace, aware of the danger, reportedly moved quickly to present unity, reminding insiders that this was not a personal war but a structural adjustment during a sensitive moment. Yet the public debate had already begun. Some saw the move as a wise step toward the future, a recognition that William and Catherine would carry the monarchy into its next era. Others viewed it as a sharp blow to Camilla, a woman who had endured decades of criticism, only to find her authority narrowed at the moment she seemed most secure. That contrast gave the story its emotional force. Catherine's rise looked steady and hopeful. Camilla's uncertainty looked painful and exposed. Historical comparisons soon followed. Royal households have always shifted power before the public fully understands what is happening. Influence moves quietly first, then titles and duties catch up later. Past transitions were rarely gentle, and this one appeared no different. The monarchy may speak in polished phrases, but behind that language are real people, real loyalties, and real wounds. Inside the palace, the balance of power reportedly became the subject no one wanted to name directly. Camilla still had her title, her position, and her bond with Charles. But Catherine now seemed to hold something equally powerful: momentum. Staff were said to recognize the change immediately. Senior advisors watched the new lines of authority with caution. Supporters on both sides understood that the king had not merely made an administrative choice. He had signaled where he believed the future must lean. And that was the hardest truth for Camilla's circle to absorb. This was not only about what she had lost, it was about what Catherine had gained. As reactions spread across Britain, the focus shifted from palace politics to a much larger question about the future of the monarchy itself. The king's decision was about far more than two royal women. It reflected a deeper struggle over what the monarchy should become in the years ahead and who would be trusted to carry that vision forward. At its heart, this was a story about survival. The monarchy no longer exists in a world where tradition alone can protect it. Public trust has become its strongest shield and its greatest weakness. Every scandal, every silence, every sign of division is judged instantly, and Charles reportedly understood that the crown could not step into the future carrying old confusion as if nothing had changed. The people expected stability, but they also expected renewal. That balance was becoming impossible to ignore. Catherine's role as future queen gave the decision a powerful meaning. She was not just being handed more responsibility for the present, she was being prepared for the years ahead, when the monarchy would depend more heavily on William and Catherine's partnership. Reports suggest senior advisors saw her as one of the few figures capable of calming public doubt while still representing change. She had the rare ability to look respectful of the past without seeming trapped by it. That is why the order carried such weight. It was not only a palace adjustment, it was a signal. Charles appeared to be choosing long-term stability over short-term comfort, and that choice came with pain. Any decision that touched Camilla's influence would be personal. Any move that strengthened Catherine would be historic. But in the cold language of monarchy, personal feelings often become secondary when the institution itself feels exposed. The growing influence of the next generation had already been visible. William and Catherine were no longer distant heirs waiting quietly at the edge of power. They were becoming the emotional center of the future crown. Their public image, their family life, and their sense of duty had formed a kind of quiet promise to the nation. Continuity without chaos, change without disrespect. For many supporters, that promise mattered more than any palace title. Still, transitions inside royal families are rarely peaceful. History is filled with moments when authority shifted before everyone was ready to accept it. Those moments often looked simple from the outside, but inside the walls of power they carried grief, fear, pride, and resentment. This situation appeared different. Camilla's supporters worried about what the decision meant for her standing. Catherine's supporters saw it as overdue recognition. Charles stood between both sides, knowing that whatever he chose would leave marks. And that is what made the saga feel bigger than one order signed at dawn. It raised the question that every monarchy must eventually face. Does the crown protect the past, or does it prepare for the future before the future arrives? Charles's answer seemed to be written not only in ink, but in sacrifice. But the most revealing aspect of the entire saga was not the order itself, it was what the decision revealed about Charles's final priorities. Long after the headlines fade, historians may remember this moment as one of the most consequential decisions of Charles' reign, not because of the controversy it created, but because of what it revealed about the future he wanted to leave behind. In the end, the order was not only about power, it was about protection. Charles, facing pressure from every side, appeared to choose stability over comfort and continuity over hesitation. That choice may have carried personal pain, but monarchy has never survived by avoiding hard decisions. It survives when someone is willing to place duty above emotion, even when the cost is felt inside the family itself. Catherine's emergence as a trusted future leader gave the moment its lasting force. She had not rushed toward authority. She had grown into it through silence, patience, and steady service. For many inside and outside the palace, that was exactly why the decision felt so powerful. Catherine seemed to represent a future that did not need to shout to be believed. Her strength was calm, but it was not weak. Her restraint was gentle, but it was not passive. Beside her stood William, no longer only the heir waiting for his chapter to begin, but a man increasingly seen as part of the monarchy's next center of gravity. Together, William and Catherine appeared positioned for an era built on trust, duty, and a more careful understanding of public expectation. Their rise did not erase the past, but it suggested that the crown was preparing to move beyond old tensions. The public response, though divided in places, seemed to circle around one larger feeling: the monarchy was changing. Some saw sadness in what Camilla's reduced influence might mean. Others saw relief in Catherine's expanded role, but almost everyone understood that a line had been crossed. The old arrangement had shifted, and once royal power moves, it rarely returns exactly as it was. For Charles, the legacy question may be the most painful of all. He has spent a lifetime waiting to rule, only to face a reign shaped by illness, family fractures, and difficult choices. Yet this decision may show what he valued most when the pressure became unbearable. Not ease, not silence, not personal comfort, stability, continuity, the future. And perhaps that is why this moment feels bigger than one royal order signed in private. It marks the closing of one chapter and the opening of another, a passage from uncertainty toward preparation. The monarchy was not simply reacting to crisis, it was arranging itself for what comes next, placing trust where the future already seemed to be gathering. And as palace lights dimmed that evening, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The future of the crown had already begun to change. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.